35. Quotes on history. Some quotes for you from the alchemical books in respect to the history of the stone. Chapter I. Concerning the origin of the philosophers, stone. Adam was the first inventor of arts, because he had knowledge of all things as well after the fall as before. Thence he predicted the world's destruction by water. From this cause, too, it came about that his successors erected 2 tables of stone, on which they engraved all natural arts in hieroglyphical characters, in order that their posterity might also become acquainted with this prediction, that so it might be heeded, and provision made in the time of danger. Subsequently, Noah found one of these tables under Mount Ararat, after the deluge. In this table were described the courses of the upper firmament and of the lower globe, and also of the planets. At length this universal knowledge was divided into several parts, and lessened in its vigor and power. By means of this separation, one man became an astronomer, another a magician, another a Kabbalist, and a fourth an alchemist. Abraham, that volcanic Tubal-Cain, a consummate astrologer and arithmetician, carried the art out of the land of Canaan into Egypt, whereupon the Egyptians rose to so great a height and dignity that this wisdom was derived from them by other nations. The patriarch Jacob painted, as it were, the sheep with various colors, and this was done by magic, for in the theology of the Chaldeans, Hebrews, Persians, and Egyptians, they held these arts to be the highest philosophy, to be learnt by the chief nobles and priests. So it was in the time of Moses, when both the priests and also the physicians were chosen from among the Magi, the priests for the judgment of what related to health, especially in the knowledge of leprosy. Moses, likewise, was instructed in the Egyptian schools, at the cost and care of Pharaoh's daughter, so that he excelled in all the wisdom and learning of that people. Thus, too, was it with Daniel, who in his youthful days imbibed the learning of the Chaldeans, so that he became a Kabbalist. Witness his divine predictions and his exposition of those words, Mene, Mene, Techelphes. These words can be understood by the prophetic and Kabbalistic art. This Kabbalistic art was perfectly familiar to, and in constant use by, Moses and the prophets. The prophet Elias foretold many things by his Kabbalistic numbers. So did the wise men of old, by this natural and mystical art, learn to know God rightly. They abode in his laws, and walked in his statutes with great firmness. It is also evident in the book of Samuel, that the Beralists did not follow the devil's part, but became, by divine permission, partakers of visions and veritable apparitions, whereof we shall treat more at large in the book of Supercelestial Things 3. This gift is granted by the Lord God to those priests who walk in the divine precepts. It was a custom among the Persians never to admit any one as king unless he were a wise man, preeminent in reality as well as in name. This is clear from the customary name of their kings, for they were called wise men. Such were those wise men and Persian Magi who came from the east to seek out the Lord Jesus, and are called natural priests. The Egyptians, also, having obtained this magic and philosophy from the Chaldeans and Persians, desired that their priests should learn the same wisdom, and they became so fruitful and successful therein that all the neighboring countries admired them. For this reason Hermes was so truly named Trismegistus, because he was a king, a priest, a prophet, a magician, and a sophist of natural things. Such another was Zoroaster, chapter 2, wherein is declared that the Greeks drew a large part of their learning from the Egyptians, and how it came from them to us. When a son of Noah possessed the third part of the world after the flood, this art broke into Chaldea and Persia, and thence spread into Egypt. The art having been found out by the superstitious and idolatrous Greeks, some of them who were wiser than the rest betook themselves to the Chaldeans and Egyptians, so that they might draw the same wisdom from their schools. Since, however, the theological study of the law of Moses did not satisfy them, they trusted to their own peculiar genius, and fell away from the right foundation of those natural secrets and arts. This is evident from their fabulous conceptions, and from their errors respecting the doctrine of Moses. It was the custom of the Egyptians to put forward the traditions of that surpassing wisdom only in enigmatical figures and abstruse histories and terms. This was afterwards followed by Homer with marvelous poetical skill, and Pythagoras was also acquainted with it, seeing that he comprised in his writings many things out of the law of Moses and the Old Testament. In like manner, Hippocrates, Thales of Miletus, Anaxagoras, Democritus, and others, did not scruple to fix their minds on the same subject. And yet none of them were practiced in the true astrology, geometry, arithmetic, or medicine, because their pride prevented this, since they would not admit disciples belonging to other nations than their own. Even when they had got some insight from the Chaldeans and Egyptians, they became more arrogant still than they were before by nature, and without any diffidence propounded the subject substantially indeed, but mixed with subtle fictions or falsehoods, and then they attempted to elaborate a certain kind of philosophy which descended from them to the Latins. These in their turn, being educated herewith, adorned it with their own doctrines, and by these the philosophy was spread over Europe. Many academies were founded for the propagation of their dogmas and rules, so that the young might be instructed, and this system flourishes with the Germans, and other nations, right down to the present day. Chapter 3. What was taught in the schools of the Egypti? Answer. The Chaldeans, Persians, and Egyptians had all of them the same knowledge of the secrets of nature, and also the same religion. It was only the names that differed. The Chaldeans and Persians called their doctrine Sophia and magic 4, and the Egyptians, because of the sacrifice, called their wisdom priestcraft. The magic of the Persians, and the theology of the Egyptians, were both of them taught in the schools of old. Though there were many schools and learned men in Arabia, Africa, and Greece, such as Albamazar, Abenzagal, Geber, Rhasis, and Avicenna among the Arabians, and among the Greeks, Machaon, Podalirius, Pythagoras, Anaxagoras, Democritus, Plato, Aristotle, and Rhodianus, still there were different opinions amongst them as to the wisdom of the Egyptian on points wherein they themselves differed, and whereupon they disagreed with it. For this reason Pythagoras could not be called a wise man, because the Egyptian priestcraft and wisdom were not perfectly taught, although he received therefrom many mysteries and arcana, and that Anaxagoras had received a great many as well, is clear from his discussions on the subject of Sol and its stone, which he left behind him after his death. Yet he differed in many respects from the Egypti. Answer. Even they would not be called wise men or magi. But, following Pythagoras, they assumed the name of philosophy. Yet they gathered no more than a few gleams like shadows from the magic of the Persians and the Egypti. Answer. But Moses, Abraham, Solomon, Adam, and the wise men that came from the east to Christ, were true magi, divine sophists and Kabbalists. Of this art and wisdom the Greeks knew very little or nothing at all, and therefore we shall leave this philosophical wisdom of the Greeks as being a mere speculation, utterly distinct and separate from other true arts and sciences. Chapter IV. What magi the Chaldeans, Persians, and Egyptians were. Many persons have endeavored to investigate and make use of the secret magic of these wise men, but it has not yet been accomplished. Many even of our own age exalt Trithemius, others Bacon and Agrippa, for magic and the Kabbalah 2 things apparently quite distinct, not knowing why they do so. Magic, indeed, is an art and faculty whereby the elementary bodies, their fruits, properties, virtues, and hidden operations are comprehended. But the Kabbalah, by a subtle understanding of the Scriptures, seems to trace out the way to God for men, to show them how they may act with Him, and prophesy from Him. For the Kabbalah is full of divine mysteries, even as magic is full of natural secrets. It teaches of and foretells from the nature of things to come as well as of things present, since its operation consists in knowing the inner constitution of all creatures, of celestial as well as terrestrial bodies, what is latent within them, what are their occult virtues, for what they were originally designed, and with what properties they are endowed. These and the like subjects are the bonds wherewith things celestial are bound up with things of the earth, as may sometimes be seen in their operation even with the bodily eyes. Such a conjunction of celestial influences, whereby the heavenly virtues acted upon inferior bodies, was formerly called by the Magi Agamahe 6, or the marriage of the celestial powers and properties with elementary bodies. Hence ensued the excellent convernixtures of all bodies, celestial and terrestrial, namely, of the sun and planets, likewise vegetables, minerals, and animals. The Aurora of the Philosophers, by Theophrastus Paracelsus, 16th Ken. Hermes, surnamed Trismegistus, is generally regarded as the father of this art, but there are different opinions with regard to his identity. Some say he was Moses. All agree that he was a very clear-sighted philosopher, the first extant author on the subject, and was also of Egyptian extraction. Others say that Enoch invented the art, and, before the coming of the flood, described it on the so-called Emerald Tables, which were afterwards found by Hermes in the valley of Hebron. Many assert that it was known to Adam, who revealed it to Seth, that Noah carried the secret with him into the ark, and that God revealed it to Solomon. But I do not agree with those who claim for our art a mystical origin, and thus only make it ridiculous in the eyes of a scornful world. If it is founded on the eternal verities of nature, why need I trouble my head with the problem whether this or that antediluvian personage had a knowledge of it? Enough for me to know that it is now true and possible, that it has been exercised by the initiated for many centuries, and under the most distant latitudes. It may also be observed that though most of these write in an obscure, figurative, allegorical, and altogether perplexing style, and though some of them have actually mixed falsehood with truth, in order to confound the ignorant, yet they, though existing in many series of ages, differing in tongue and nation, have not diversely handled one operation, but do all exhibit a most marvelous and striking agreement in regard to the main features of their teaching, an agreement which is absolutely inexplicable, except on the supposition that our art is something more than a mere labyrinth of perplexing words. The Metamorphosis of Metals, by Irenaeus Philalethes, 1694 AD. From the beginning of the world, there have always been God-enlightened men and experienced philosophers and wise Gentiles who diligently studied the nature and properties of the lower creation. They laboriously endeavored and fervently longed to discover whether nature contained anything that would preserve our earthly body from decay and death, and maintain it in perpetual health and vigor. For by the light of nature, and divine revelation, they intuitively perceived that the Almighty, in his love to men, must have concealed in the world some wonderful arcanum by which every imperfect, diseased, and defective thing in the whole world might be renewed, and restored to its former vigor. By the most diligent and careful search they gradually found out that there was nothing in this world that could procure for our earthly and corruptible body immunity from death, since death was laid upon the protoplasts, Adam and Eve, and their posterity, as a perpetual penalty. But they did discover one thing which, being itself incorruptible, has been ordained of God for the good of man, to remove disease, to cure all imperfection, to purge old age, and to prolong our brief life, a boon actually enjoyed by the patriarchs. For by its aid Noah is said to have built the ark, Moses the tabernacle with all its golden vessels, and Solomon the temple, besides accomplishing many other great deeds, fashioning many precious ornaments, and procuring for himself long life and boundless riches. The Sophic Hydrolith, or Water Stone of the Wise, by Anonymous, 17th Ken. After the flood, the general understanding and knowledge of this true natural philosophy became weakened in force and scattered in fragments in all directions. Hence arose a subdividing of the whole into parts, and one has become an astronomy, another a magician, a third a Kabbalist, a fourth an alchemist, and especially did it afterwards flourish in Egypt. A Golden and Blessed Casket of Nature's Marvels, by Benedictus Figulus, 1607 AD. For Adam, created by God full of understanding and perfect knowledge of natural things, doubtless knew those which were capable of prolonging human life and securing immunity from disease. Doubtless he also taught the same to some of his descendants, and they again to others. Hence many of the fathers lived to the age of 700, 800, and more years. But some did not live so long, this secret not being revealed to all. Man, the best and most perfect of God's creatures, by Benedictus Figulus, 1607 AD. Adam, our first father, who had knowledge of all arts, also received that of medicine from God, and it was kept secret by the learned, as the great gift of God, until Noah's time. When God destroyed the world by the flood, the art of medicine, with many other controlled arts, was lost. No one remained who knew them except Noah, called by some Hermogenes, or Hermes, to whom antiquity ascribes the knowledge of all things celestial and terrestrial. The same Noah, before his death, described medicine, skillfully concealing it among another matter. After his death this knowledge returned to God, and thus, through the flood and Noah's death, was taken away from the human race. Whence came the idols which, before Christ, were in Europe, Africa, and Asia? Our human reason has speculated them out, and thus also has it happened with medicine. After Noah's time, men, harassed by diseases, sought refuge, one in herbs, another in animals, a third in stones and metals, and thus one thing after another was tried, without full knowledge of the same, which had some appearance of virtue. But there was as yet no doctor. The sick were carried to some public place, those who had had similar complaints showing them the remedies used by themselves, which the patients tried on chance. Such was medicine until the time of Apollo, i.e., 1915 BC. This Apollo was a clever and learned man, and carefully noting those things which proved efficacious in diseases, he began to visit the sick, and thus became a public physician, to whom, after his death, a temple was erected and divine honors were paid. In such honor was medicine then held which today begs its bread. Aesculapius, succeeding his father, also treated the sick with skill and knowledge inherited from his father, and to him there was a temple erected, as to a god. After his death the kings commanded that all medical discoveries and observations should be written down and publicly exhibited on the walls of the temple of Aesculapius. 457 years after came Hippocrates Cus, who was commanded to arrange the experiments in the temple of Aesculapius, which he did, and, from these experiments, first invented methodical medicine. Hence from him medicine, as now taught in the schools, derives its origin. When empirical medicine thus came into great honor in Greece, many physicians arose, as Diodes, Chrysippus, Coristinus, Anaxagoras, Erostratus. 500 years after Hippocrates came Galenus, a plausible man who described the Hippocratic medicine, painting it in beautiful colors, inventing causes and symptoms of diseases, ascribing virtues to herbs, and teaching the cure of feverish illnesses by cold, that of cold ones by heat. Thus did human speculation, from experiments, deduce the science of medicine, yet, at bottom, it was no science, but mere opinions, accepted as truth itself. But God, who is not always wroth with man, has, in our own time, chosen Philip Theophrastus Bombast, of Hohenheim, to rekindle the light of medical science, and to expose the deceit practiced in his day. Therefore, this Theophrastus is the true monarch of medicine, and will remain so until the end of time. A dialogue, by Alexander von Suchten, 16th–17th Ken. 36. Timeline. The following is a timeline of alchemical events, which I copied directly from alchemywebsite.com. It's not complete, and I didn't update it with any more information. The purpose of this timeline is just to give you a general feel for the history. History can never be recorded or written about correctly, so I don't feel it's necessary to be too serious about it. Anyway, history repeats itself. 1144, earliest dated Western alchemical treatise, Robert of Chester de Composition Alchemiae. 1148, Hildegard of Bingen writing on science. 1150, Turba Philosophorum translated from Arabic. 1225, Michael Scott Liber Introductorius, Liber Particularis. 1230, Bartholomew Anglicus de Rerum Proprietatibus. 1231, first mention of alchemy in French literature, Ronman de la Rose. 1235, Robert Grosseteste, Bishop of Lincoln, discusses transmutation of metals in De Artibus Liberalibus and Degeneration Stellarum. 1240, the Dominican Thomas of Cantimpra mentions alchemy in his Liber de Natura Rerum. 1250, Vincent de Beauvais Speculum Maius, this encyclopedia mentions alchemy in many places. 1256, King Alfonso the Wise of Castile orders translation of alchemical texts from Arabic. He is supposed to have written Tesoro, a treatise on the philosopher's stone. 1257, Franciscan friar Bonaventura de Seos, Liber Compostella, provides some alchemical recipes. 1264. Albertus Magnus, Bishop of Regensburg, writes De Mineralibus. 1266. Roger Bacon Opus Maius. 1267. Roger Bacon Opus Tertium. 1270. Thomas Aquinas is sympathetic to the idea of alchemical transmutation in his Summa Theologia. 1272. Provençal chapter at Narbonne forbade the Franciscans to practice alchemy. 1273. Dominican order at Pest warned friars not to study or teach alchemy. 1275. Ramon Lull Ars Magna. 1300. Arnold of Villanova writes a number of important treatises on alchemy. Questiones tam essentials quam accidentales, Epistola sup alchemia ad regem Neapolitanum, De Secretis Naturae, Exempla de Art Philosophorum. 1310. Dante begins work on his Divine Comedy. 1313. Friars Minors Constitution generates Antique forbade the friars to practice alchemy. 1314. Destruction of the Knights Templar. 1317. Pope John XXII's papal bull against alchemical counterfeit spondit quaes non exhibent. Cistercians ban alchemy. 1318. The monk Adolf Muther driven from the Cistercian monastery at Walkenried for practicing alchemy. 1320. John Daston, the alchemist, writes his alchemical letters to Pope John XXII. 1323. Dominicans in France prohibit the teaching of alchemy at the University of Paris, and demand the burning of alchemical writings. 1329. King Edward III requests Thomas Carey to find 2 alchemists who have escaped, and to find the secret of their art. 1330. Pope John XXII gives funds to his physician to set up a laboratory for a certain secret work. 1335. Petrus Bonus of Ferrara Preciosa Margarita Novella. 1339. Pope Benedict XII orders an investigation into the alchemical activities of some clerics and monks. 1352. Pseudo-Lulian Liber de Secretis Naturae su de Quinta Essentia. 1356. Pope Innocent VI imprisons the Catalan alchemist John of Rupescissa. 1357. Ho Chilenus's commentary on the Emerald Tablet of Hermes. 1358. Francesco Petrarch discussed alchemy in De Remediis Utriusque Fortunae. 1370. William Langland's Piers Plowman criticizes alchemists as deceivers. 1374. John of Livania, canon in Trier, writes 3 books on the vanity of alchemy. 1376. The Dominican Directorium Inquisitorum, the textbook for inquisitors, places alchemists anning magicians and wizards. 1380. King Charles V the Wise issues a decree forbidding alchemical experiments. 1388. Geoffrey Chaucer Canterbury Tales discussed alchemy in the canons Yeoman's Tale. 1403. King Henry IV of England issues a prohibition of alchemy and to stop counterfeit money. 1415. Early German MS Buch der Heiligen Dreifaltigkeit paralleling the Christ and the Philosopher's Stone. 1450. Beginning of printing. Cosimo de' Medici asks Marsilio Ficino to set up the Platonic Academy in Florence. 1456. 12 men petition Henry VI of England for a license to practice alchemy. 1470. Der Antichrist und die 15 Zeichen, the Book of the Antichrist, associates alchemists with demons and Satan. 1471. George Ripley Compound of Alchemy. Ficino's translation of the Corpus Hermeticum. 1474. Christopher of Paris Elucidarius. 1476. George Ripley Medulla Alchemiae. 1477. Thomas Norton writes his Ordinal. 1484. Avicenna's De Anima. Hieronymus Bosch Garden of Earthly Delights. 1485. Geber Summa Perfectionis. 1488. The figure of Hermes Trismegistus is put into the mosaic pavement in Siena Cathedral. 1494. Sebastian Brandt The Ship of Fools discussed methods used by cheating alchemists. 1497. Tractatus contra alchemistas written by a Dominican questions the genuineness of alchemical gold. 1499. Hypnerotomachia polyphili. 1505, Bergbuchlein provides first published information on traditions of mining. 1519, Braunschweig's Das Buch zu Distillierern. 1530, Georgius Agricola Burmanus, Book on Mining and Extraction of Ores. 1531, Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy. 1532, earliest manuscript of the Splendor Solis. 1540, Vannocchio Biringuccio de la Pyrotechnia. 1541, in hoc volumen Alchemia first alchemical compendium. 1546, Petrus Bonis Preciosa Margarita novella of 1335 printed. 1550, Rosarium Philosophorum published. 1555, first edition of Alessio Piemontesi Secreti. 1556, Georgius Agricola de Re Metallica. 1560, Adam von Bodenstein begins his work of editing various writings of Paracelsus. Giambattista della Porta Magia Naturalis. 1561, Peter Perner prints the compendium of 53 alchemical treatises, Verae Alchemiae Artisque Metallici. 1564, Nazaris tu Metamorphosi Metallicoe Humano. John Dee's Hieroglyphic Monad. 1572, Peter Perner prints the Compendium Alchemiae Quam Vocant. 1574, Peter Perner prints the collected works of Paracelsus in Latin. 1580, Rabbi Loew of Prague makes the Golem. 1582, Reusna Pandora. 1589, Edward Kelly embarks on his public alchemical transmutations in Prague. 1591, reprinting of John Dee's Hieroglyphic Monad. 1595, Libavius Alchymia. 1599, first appearance of a work of Basil Valentine. Book of Lambspring included in Barnard's Triga Chemica. 1600, Giordano Bruno executed. 1602, publication of the first volumes of the Compendium of Alchemical Texts Theatrum C. Hemic. 1604, Basil Valentine's Triumphal Chariot of Alchemy. Simon Studians Naometria Mus. Novum Lumen Chemicum. 1609, main edition of Cunrath's Amphitheatrum Sapientiae Aetonae. Oswald Kroll Basilica Chemica. 1610, Jean Begin Tyrocinium Chimicum. 1611, Ben Jonson's play The Alchemist. 1612, Flamel Figures Hieroglyphics, first publication. Ruland's Lexicon Alchemiae. Jacob Baume Aurora. 1614, Pharma Fraternitatis. Isaac Casabon redates the works of Hermes Trismegistus. 1615, Confessio Fraternitatis Stefan Michelspacher Kabbalah, Spiegel der Kunst UNND Nature. 1616, Cheimisch Hochzeit. 1617, first volume Offlud's Utriusque Cosmi Historia. 1618, Theophilus Schweighart's Speculum Sophicum Rhodo Stauroticum. Mayer's Atalanta Fugians. 1619, Siebmarch's Waterstone of the Wise. 1623, Jean Despagnet Inchiridion Physici Restituti. 1624, Stolzius's Viridarium Chimicum. 1625, Musium Hermeticum. 1629, Flood's Summum Bonum. 1631, Arthur D. Fasciculus Chemicus in Latin. 1640, Alvaro Alonso Barber Art of Metals. 1650, Arthur D. Fasciculus Chemicus issued in English. 1651, John French The Art of Distillation. 1652, Ashmole Theatrum Chemicum Britannicum. English translation of Pharma and Confessio edited by Thomas Vaughan. 1654, Pierre Borel Bibliotheca Chimica. 1666, Helvetius account of the transmutation in The Hague. Crassulame Lux Obnubilata. 1667, Irenaeus Philalethes an open entrance to the closed palace of the king. 1670, Montfaucon de Villiers satirizes Secret Nolid in his Comte de Gabalus. 1672, Bibliothèque des Philosophies Chimiques. 1673, William Cooper begins to publish works on alchemy, especially those of Irenaeus Philalethes. 1674, Knorr von Rosenroth's Kabbalah Denudata. 1677, Mutu's Liber. 1682, Gichtel's edition of the collected works of Baume. 1690, publication of the English translation of the Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz. 1702, Monge Bibliotheca Chemica Curiosa, Alchemical Compendium. 1710, Samuel Richter begins to form the Order of the Golden and Rosy Cross. 1719, Georg von Welling Opus Mago Kabbalisticum, 1st edition. 1723, Kirchweger's Golden Chain of Homer. 1728, Friedrich Rothschild's Deutsches Theatrum Chemicum. 1735, Abraham Eliezer Uraltes Chemisches Werk. 1752, Hermaphroditisches Sonne und Mondskind. 1758, Dom Pernti Dictionnaire Mytho-Hermetique. 1776, Adam Weishaupt forms the Order of Illuminati of Bavaria. 1779, Birkholz, Der Kompass der Weisen. 1783, James Price commits suicide after performing some alchemical experiments. 1785, Geheime Figuren, the secret symbols of the Rosicrucians. 1802, Karl von Eckartshausen Chemische Versuche. 37, Nicolas Flamel. As far as alchemists go, Nicolas Flamel, or Nicolas Flamel, was not particularly interesting, nor did he write any really useful information on the stone. But he is probably the most well-known of the alchemists due to him being a character in many popular fiction books, especially Harry Potter. So I'm including this chapter just because he's popular. Flamel did exist, and he did find the stone. There are plenty of records in Paris from his time to prove his existence. There is nothing legendary about the life of Nicolas Flamel. According to the records, he was born in 1330 and died in 1418. Phi was a real person, who became one of the greatest alchemists in the world. The Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris contains works copied in his own hand and original works written by him. All the official documents relating to his life have been found. His marriage contract, his deeds of gift, his will. His history rests solidly on those substantial material proofs for which men clamor if they are to believe in obvious things. To this indisputably authentic history, legend has added a few flowers. But in every spot where the flowers of legend grow, underneath there is the solid earth of truth. A detailed biography of Nicolas Flamel, by Reginald Merton, 2000-2010. Yes, Nicolas Flamel of Harry Potter fame was a real person. Some believe he is a real person. Flamel was born in 1330 in Paris or its immediate environs. He achieved success as a scrivener and bookseller in Paris. He and his wife, Pernelle, spent their later years in a house at 51, Rue de Montmorency. Built in 1407, the house is the oldest in Paris still standing. You can literally get a flavor for Nicolas Flamel's home by dining in the restaurant that occupies the building's ground floor, the Auberge Nicolas Flamel. You can also learn more about Flamel by taking the Mysteries of Paris Ghost Tour. This English-language tour begins not far from Flamel's home at O'Sullivan's Rebel Bar near the C-Hatelet metro station at 10, Rue des Lombards. Like the majority of his fellow countrymen, Flamel was Catholic. One night, he had a dream in which an angel presented him with a book. At first you will understand nothing in it, the angel told him. But one day you will see in it that which no other man will be able to see. Not long after, a young man in need of money appeared in his bookshop offering him a manuscript called the Book of Abraham the Jew. Flamel recognized it immediately as the book from the dream and did not quibble over the asking price of 2 florins. The book contained many strange characters and diagrams and the word, Maranatha, repeated over and over on every page. It was written by a man who allegedly was a Levite priest, as well as a prince, astrologer, and philosopher. It promised curses to anyone who read it who was not a priest or a scribe. Flamel traveled to the part of Spain under Moorish control in search of Jews who could help him decipher the portions of the text written in ancient Hebrew. He found a man in Lyon who could translate the few pages of the book of Abraham Flamel had brought with him. The man agreed to return to Paris with Flamel to help decipher the rest of the book, but became ill in Orleans and died. Flamel returned to Paris and with the knowledge he had gained from his journey was able to eventually comprehend the meaning of the rest of the Book of Abraham. Using techniques described in the manuscript, he supposedly turned mercury into silver and gold and became wealthy. He and his wife used their wealth for philanthropic purposes. According to historian Louis Figuier, husband and wife lavished succor on the poor, founded hospitals, built or repaired cemeteries, restored the front of Sainte Geneviève des Ardents and endowed the institution of the Quinze Vinques, the blind inmates of which, in memory of this fact, came every year to the church of Saint Jacques la Boucherie to pray for their benefactor. Figuier said this practice continued until 1789. The church was demolished in 1797, save for its bell tower, which is part of the Paris ghost tour. One treasure Flamel was not willing to share with others, however, was the secret of the philosopher's stone, which made possible the transmutation of metals and, according to some, also contained the secret of immortality. In 1410, Flamel designed his own tombstone, which is still on display at the Musée de Cluny. It includes images of the sun and a man, depicted along with two other men as saints with a key and a book. The tombstone originally covered Flamel's grave in the Cemetery of Innocents, where he was laid to rest in 1418, but as Flamel's notoriety grew over the years, his gravesite became the frequent target of robbers and the tombstone was moved. Legend has it that the first grave robber was shocked to discover no body underneath the tombstone, lending credence to the Flamel immortality stories. Seeking the Immortal Nicolas Flamel in Paris, by Dennis D. Jacobs, 2010. 38. Paracelsus. Paracelsus, born Philippus Aureolus Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, the 11th of November or the 17th of December 1493 in Einsiedeln, the 24th of September 1541 in Salzburg, was a Renaissance physician, botanist, alchemist, astrologer, and general occultist. Paracelsus, meaning equal to or greater than Celsus, refers to the Roman encyclopedist Aulus Cornelius Celsus from the 1st century known for his tract on medicine. He is also credited for giving zinc its name, calling it zincum, and is regarded as the first systematic botanist. Paracelsus, by en.wikipedia.org. I'm including a chapter on Paracelsus because he was considered by many alchemists after his time to be one of the greatest alchemists of this age, after Hermes himself. Paracelsus was credited on writing hundreds of books on alchemy and medicine, including advanced topics such as taquin, creation of life, and for being the first to invent, or rediscover, the shorter method of making the stone out of urine only. Although I do think some alchemists before Paracelsus, and of this age, were using this shorter method. I only had access to a few of Paracelsus' books, some of which appear to be forgeries, and of those that were not, they were not very detailed. So Paracelsus wasn't a big help to me. But certainly Paracelsus was the first of a wave of alchemists who wrote much more openly about the art, after the invention of the Gutenberg printing press. It's possible he had a connection to the Rosicrucians, since they were already existent in Germany during Paracelsus' life, although still silent during this time. Some people have supposed Paracelsus to be the founder of the Rosicrucians, although there is no evidence to support that. Paracelsus' life story is not very interesting, at least the way it's told today, so I will not waste your time reproducing it here. You can look it up if you are interested. 39. Rosicrucians. The Rosicrucians were a secret society of alchemists. Modern societies of the same name are unrelated to the original Rosicrucians of the 17th century. The Rosicrucians recruited all true alchemists to join their society. They had agents in every country of Europe and were a strong influence in establishing the New World, in America, Freemasonry, and modern science as we know it. Rosicrucianism is a philosophical secret society, said to have been founded in late medieval Germany by Christian Rosenkreuz. It holds a doctrine or theology, built on esoteric truths of the ancient past, which, concealed from the average man, provide insight into nature, the physical universe and the spiritual realm. Rosicrucianism is symbolized by the Rosy Cross. Between 1607 and 1616, 2 anonymous manifestos were published, first in Germany and later throughout Europe. These were Fama Fraternitatis RC, the Fame of the Brotherhood of RC, and Confessio Fraternitatis, the Confession of the Brotherhood of RC. The influence of these documents, presenting a most laudable order of mystic philosopher doctors and promoting a universal reformation of mankind, gave rise to an enthusiasm called by its historian Dame Frances Yates the Rosicrucian Enlightenment. Rosicrucianism, by en.wikipedia.org. According to Altar of the Therific Tie and the New Atlantis, the Rosicrucians lived together in a castle in Germany. They performed all kinds of experiments and invented many new technologies. They also had access to advanced ancient technology. Furthermore, the Rosicrucians secretly influenced the world by planting inventions and ideas when and where they saw fit. In order that we have knowledge and news of all things in the order so that everything shall be free and unconcealed from any of us. We travel through all lands unknown, now here, now there. We have in these times many things which were invented by the ancients which we admit and experiment with and readily allow them to pass, which if rightly looked at, are hardly to be comprehended by human mind. On little do we live well satisfied with some thing. Our bodies we cure according to nature properly. Therefore our health is good indeed and we live many a long year. Which creeps softly along like a tender rivulet runs equally away on its course. Altar of the Therific Tie, by BMI of the Rosicrucians, 1616 AD. We practice likewise all conclusions of grafting, and inoculating, as well of wild trees as fruit trees, which produceth many effects. And we make by art, in the same orchards and gardens, trees and flowers, to come earlier or later than their seasons, and to come up and bear more speedily than by their natural course they do. We make them also by art greater much than their nature, and their fruit greater and sweeter, and of differing taste, smell, color, and figure, from their nature. And many of them we so order as that they become of medicinal use. Wherein we find many strange effects, as continuing life in them, though divers parts, which you account vital, be perished and taken forth. Resuscitating of some that seem dead in appearance, and the like. We try also all poisons, and other medicines upon them, as well of chirurgery as physic. By art likewise we make them greater or smaller than their kind is, and contrariwise dwarf them and stay their growth. We make them more fruitful and bearing than their kind is, and contrariwise barren and not generative. Also we make them differ in color, shape, activity, many ways. We find means to make commixtures and copulations of divers kinds, which have produced many new kinds, and them not barren, as the general opinion is. We have also divers mechanical arts, which you have not, and stuffs made by them, as papers, linen, silks, tissues, dainty works of feathers of wonderful luster, excellent dyes, and many others, and shops likewise as well for such as are not brought into vulgar use among us, as for those that are. For you must know, that of the things before recited, many of them are grown into use throughout the kingdom, but yet, if they did flow from our invention, we have of them also for patterns and principles. We procure means of seeing objects afar off, as in the heaven and remote places, and represent things near as afar off, and things afar off as near, making feigned distances. We have also helps for the sight far above spectacles and glasses in use. We have also glasses and means to see small and minute bodies, perfectly and distinctly, as the shapes and colors of small flies and worms, grains, and flaws in gems which cannot otherwise be seen, observations in urine and blood not otherwise to be seen. We make artificial rainbows, halos, and circles about light. We represent also all manner of reflections, refractions, and multiplications of visual beams of objects. We have all means to convey sounds in trunks and pipes, in strange lines and distances. We imitate also flights of birds. We have some degrees of flying in the air. We have ships and boats for going under water and brooking of seas, also swimming urdles and supporters. Lastly, we have circuits or visits, of divers principal cities of the kingdom, where as it cometh to pass we do publish such new profitable inventions as we think good. The New Atlantis, by Francis Bacon, 1627 AD. 40. Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon, first and only Viscount of St. Alban, KC, the 22nd of January 1561 to the 9th of April 1626, was an English philosopher, statesman, scientist, lawyer, jurist and author. He served both as Attorney General and Lord Chancellor of England. Although his political career ended in disgrace, he remained extremely influential through his works, especially as philosophical advocate and practitioner of the scientific revolution. His dedication brought him into a rare historical group of scientists who were killed by their own experiments. His works established and popularized deductive methodologies for scientific inquiry, often called the Baconian method or simply, the scientific method. His demand for a planned procedure of investigating all things natural marked a new turn in the rhetorical and theoretical framework for science, much of which still surrounds conceptions of proper methodology today. Francis Bacon, by en.wikipedia.org. Francis Bacon was an alchemist and a Rosicrucian. He was also the real author of the plays of William Shakespeare. Possibly along with his brother Anthony and his group of good pens. 1 year after the publication of the first great Shakespearean folio, a remarkable volume on cryptograms and ciphers was published. The title page of the work is reproduced here. The year of its publication, 1624, was during the Rosicrucian controversy. The translation of the title page is as follows: The Cryptomenesis and Cryptography of Gustavus Solinus in the 9 books, to which is added a clear explanation of the system of steganography of John Trithemius, abbot of Spanheim and Herbopolis, a man of admirable genius. Interspersed with worthy inventions of the author and others, 1624. The author of this volume was believed to be Augustus, Duke of Brunswick. The symbols and emblems ornamenting the title page, however, are conclusive evidence that the Rosicrucians were behind its publication. At the bottom of the picture is a nobleman placing his hat on another man's head. In the 2 side panels are striking and subtle, Shakespearean, allusions. On the left is a nobleman, possibly Bacon, handing a paper to another man of mean appearance who carries in his hand a spear. At the right, the man who previously carried the spear is shown in the costume of an actor, wearing spurs and blowing a horn. The allusion to the actor blowing his horn and the figure carrying the spear suggest much, especially as spear is the last syllable of the name, Shakespeare. The Secret Teachings of All Ages, by Manly P. Hall, 1928 AD. The whole Shakespearean authorship debate has been going on for centuries, so I won't try to convince you about that. But what I will convince you of is that the author of Shakespeare's works, whether Shakespeare, Bacon, or another, was certainly an alchemist, as is clear from alchemical references in many of Shakespeare's plays, and most obviously in his poem, The Phoenix and the Turtle, Dove. Let the bird of loudest lay on the sole Arabian tree, herald sad and trumpet be, to whose sound chaste wings obey. But thou shrieking harbinger, foul procurer of the fiend, augur of the fever's end, to this troop come thou not near. From this session interdict every fowl of tyrant wing. Save the eagle, feathered king. Keep the obsequies so strict. Let the priest in surplice white, that defunctive music can be the death divining swan, lest the requiem lack his right. And thou treble dated crow, that thy sable gender mackest, with the breath thou givest and tackest. Mongst our mourners shalt thou go. Here the anthem doth commence. Love and constancy is dead. Phoenix and the turtle fled in a mutual flame from hence. So they loved, as love in twain had the essence but in one. 2 distinct, division none. Number there in love was slain. Hearts remote, yet not asunder. Distance, and no space was seen, twixt the turtle and his queen. But in 'em it were a wonder. So between 'em love did shine, that the turtle saw his right flaming in the phoenix sight. Either was the other's mine. Property was thus appalled, that the self was not the same. Single nature's double name neither two nor one was called. Reason, in itself confounded, saw division grow together, to themselves yet either neither, simple was so well compounded, that it cried, how true a twain seemeth this concordant one. Love hath reason, reason none, if what parts can so remain. Whereupon it made this threen to the phoenix and the dove, company supremes and stars of love. A chorus to their tragic scene. Three knows beauty, truth, and rarity. Grace in all simplicity. Here enclosed in cinders he. Death is now the phoenix nest, and the turtle's loyal breast to eternity doth rest. Leaving no posterity. 'Twas not their infirmity, it was married chastity. Truth may seem, but cannot be. Beauty brag, but 'tis not she. Truth and beauty buried be. To this urn let those repair that are either true or fair, for these dead birds sigh a prayer. By Shakespeare. Bacon was a very influential figure in England in his time. He achieved a lot and contributed a lot. He has even been considered the father of modern science. But this part of his history is well enough documented that I need not cover it. Bacon was involved in all kinds of influential business, including the first English translation of the Bible, the King James Version, and the colonization of America. Bacon also wrote the New Atlantis, which I quoted from in the previous chapter. This was considered by most to be a work of fiction. However, considering that we know Bacon was a Rosicrucian himself, and it is clear he was writing about the Rosicrucians, we can take his description of Salomon's house, the Rosicrucians, literally. I'm certain that this was the intention, as the whole story only builds up to a long description of what is clearly the Rosicrucians, and then the story ends. The New Atlantis was also appended with Magnalia Naturae, Precipue quod usus humanos, which is a list of uses of the stone, as quoted in chapter 5. Bacon faked his own death, and somewhat amusingly. One report, although unconfirmed, claims that Bacon attended his own funeral. Note particularly the references to the conservation and induration of bodies, and a direct mention of the stone in his last letter. On the 9th of April 1626 Bacon died while at Arundel Mansion at Highgate outside London of pneumonia. An influential account of the circumstances of his death was given by John Aubrey. Aubrey has been criticized for his evident credulousness in this and other works. On the other hand, he knew Thomas Hobbes, the fellow philosopher and friend of Bacon. Aubrey's vivid account, which portrays Bacon as a martyr to experimental scientific method, had him journeying to Highgate through the snow with the king's physician when he is suddenly inspired by the possibility of using the snow to preserve meat. They were resolved they would try the experiment presently. They alighted out of the coach and went into a poor woman's house at the bottom of Highgate Hill, and bought a fowl, and made the woman exeterate it. A result of being out in the cold in order to stuff the fowl with snow, Bacon contracted a fatal case of pneumonia. Some people, including Aubrey, consider these two contiguous, possibly coincidental events as related and causative of his death. The snow so chilled him that he immediately fell so extremely ill, that he could not return to his lodging, but went to the Earl of Arundel's house at Highgate, where they put him into a damp bed that had not been lain in, which gave him such a cold that in 2 or 3 days, as I remember Mr. Hobbes told me, he died of suffocation. Being unwittingly on his deathbed, the philosopher wrote his last letter to his absent host and friend Lord Arundel. My very good lord, I was likely to have had the fortune of Caius Plinius the elder, who lost his life by trying an experiment about the burning of Mount Vesuvius, for I was also desirous to try an experiment or two touching the conservation and induration of bodies. As for the experiment itself, it succeeded excellently well. But in the journey between London and Highgate, I was taken with such a fit of casting as I know not whether it were the stone, or some surfeit or cold, or indeed a touch of them all three. But when I came to your lordship's house, I was not able to go back, and therefore was forced to take up my lodging here, where your housekeeper is very careful and diligent about me, which I assure myself your lordship will not only pardon towards him, but think the better of him for it. For indeed your lordship's house was happy to me, and I kiss your noble hands for the welcome which I am sure you give me to it. I know how unfit it is for me to write with any other hand than mine own, but by my troth my fingers are so disjointed with sickness that I cannot steadily hold a pen. Francis Bacon, by en.wikipedia.org